Well, for more on that, Karina spoke further to Robert Stavins, the A.J. Meyer Professor of Energy and Economic Development at Harvard University. She asked him about the consequences of the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Accord.
The important implications of the U.S. dropping out of the Paris Club are the effects that it may have on other countries. Now, there's no reason to worry about it causing the European Union to step back. If anything, it's going to make the European Union and the member states more aggressive on climate change. The big concerns are for the large emerging economies, China, India, Brazil, Korea, South Africa, Mexico, and Indonesia. That's where the concern would be.
So is the worry that some countries will look at the U.S. and say, well, if they're not committing to emissions reductions, why should we? Is that the worry?
In general, that they might be less ambitious with their pledges, these nationally determined contributions, than they otherwise would have been. But the only place we've seen any change in that direction is from Brazil. But that's not because of Trump. That's because of President Bolsonaro, a populist right-winger like our president, and he, independently of what Trump was doing, was very opposed to any action on climate change and is a skeptic.
The Trump administration has rolled back a lot of the Obama-era environmental regulations. Which policy change do you think is the most threatening when it comes to fighting climate change?
So there are two that compete for worst. One would be the Clean Power Plan. That was the Obama regulation that affected the generation of electricity and was going to have significant effects in terms of advancing the move from coal to natural gas to nuclear power, possibly into renewables. That's been undone and replaced now. So that's gone. And the other would be the corporate average fuel economy standards, the CAFE standards, which are how we regulate fuel efficiency of automobiles. So Trump has frozen those in place. They were going to be becoming much more aggressive, and he's frozen those in place. Those two will have the biggest effect on emissions.
Now, the U.S. had pledged to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by about a quarter by 2025 compared with 2005 levels, but the U.S. is behind on those targets, and in fact, emissions rose last year. So where does the U.S. stand right now on its commitments?
The first thing to recognize is that the pledge, the 26 to 28% by 2025, below 2005, was unlikely to be achieved even if Secretary Clinton had been elected president. The best estimates at the time were perhaps a 19% reduction with policies that the Obama administration had put forward, plus what the Clinton administration might do. Now, we're still on target to have a reduction overall in emissions relative to 2005. Now it looks like it might be something between 10% and 14%. And that's driven, a large part of that, remember, is driven by the coal to natural gas shift.
Trump has consistently promised that he will bring coal back. Is there any possibility of that?
Absolutely not. I mean, the coal industry is an industry of the past in the United States, unless there's a technological change that enables so-called clean coal to be used. And when I say clean coal, I mean in which there is complete sequestration of all carbon dioxide and other pollutants are removed, such as mercury. Were it not for that, then coal simply does not offer low-cost sources of electricity like natural gas does in the United States.
Can the world avoid the worst effects of climate change without the participation of the United States?
If other countries become even more aggressive, yes. I mean, remember, China is the world's largest emitter. The United States is still the largest contributor to the accumulated stock in the atmosphere, but China is going to overtake the United States in that regard in 10 years or so, depending upon relative rates of economic growth. So the United States represents, what is it? China represents about 30% of global emissions. The United States represents something in the order of 15% of global emissions. It's more difficult without the U.S. in, but I think the most important way in which it's more difficult is not just not having the U.S. participating, but what is the effect of the U.S. not participating on the large emerging economies.
It seems that as the U.S. has pulled out of a leadership role in fighting climate change, China has stepped in. Do you see that happening?
So in the years leading up to the Paris Climate Agreement, a lot of the credit for the agreement having been completed and having been as effective as it appears it could be if all countries lived up to their pledges, goes to the co-leadership of the United States and China. They worked very closely together. They were out front with their announcements of their pledges, which was extremely important. It turns out that China, as I perceive it from afar, and also from my discussions I have, I'm in Beijing regularly, we'll be there next week or the week after, that China is quite happy to go from co-leadership with the United States to sole leadership, and that's what's happened.
What do you make of China's efforts? Do you believe they're sincere about fighting climate change and that it's an issue they truly care about?
So there is a great deal of concern within the Chinese government. I can't say about the average person on the street, but certainly within the Chinese government. Now, whether or not they live up to what the pledges are, that's we simply don't know. They're putting together in the year 2020, it appears it'll be launched a tradable performance standard similar to a cap and trade system, starting out with the electricity sector, and then we'll begin to go to other sectors as well. If that meets with full compliance, then that will show that they're ultimately both serious and successful. But it's too soon to say.